Appreciate all your hard work. My name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based think tank that does research on K-12 education reform.
My name is Tim Isaacs. I'm executive director at the Center for Teaching the Rule of Law at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia.
My name is Darcy Kern. I'm a history professor at Southern Connecticut State University, also an alumna of the program, and looking forward to hearing from you today.
Maybe you could share with us your names and your teacher.
Thank you for allowing us to testify before you today. We are a unit composed of juniors and seniors from East Grand Rapids High School. I am Sophia Beaucamp.
I am Isabella Greenwald.
I am Sienna Pulaski.
And I'm Max Bruce, and we are coached by the advantageous Adam Horos and the benevolent Benjamin Langholtz, and we are Unit 1.
Great, that's a terrific introduction. So this is Unit 1. We'll be addressing question 2. I'll read all of the Unit 1 question, all of question 2. The Unit 1, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? This is question 2. Parliament passed the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679. What is habeas corpus, and to what extent, if any, is it essential to the principle of limited government? How has the writ of habeas corpus evolved in the United States? Under what circumstances, if any, might the writ of habeas corpus place on an unreasonable burden on the government? Timer?
When imagining a dystopian government, one pictures a society where a citizen may be sequestered into the depths of a jail cell or an interrogation room with little to no recourse. Yet, a pivotal rule helps keep our nation from such a grisly vision: habeas corpus. This common law protects the citizen against arbitrary imprisonment, and despite its evolution in history, is among the constitutional jewels of our nation.
Habeas corpus gives people the right to know the crime for which they are being held, enforces speedy trials, and allows individuals to appeal to arbitrary court decisions. Its origins lie in medieval England and the rights of Englishmen, a tradition of individual protections passed down in common law. However, in the 13th century, Magna Carta canonized this rule in English law, instilled with the words, "No free man shall be taken or imprisoned or deceased or exiled, except upon lawful judgment," providing the basis for a modern and limited government.
The extent to which habeas corpus is adhered to parallels the existence of a limited government. In a limited government, rights and powers are held by the citizens, with restraints on the government often imposed by a constitution. To protect this balance of responsibility, it is integral that the state does not punish its citizens arbitrarily. It is only just to carry out punishment if they commit offenses warranting it and are notified of their crimes. This phenomenon of a limited government can only be secured by a rule like habeas corpus.
Because habeas corpus is not explicit in how it is applied in the Constitution, it has undergone many refinements. It was first referenced in Article 1, Section 9 of our Constitution, with "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless in cases of rebellion or invasion." Article 3 enabled the Judiciary Acts of 1789, where lawmakers created lower federal courts, which led to the expansion of state courts ruling on habeas corpus. Thus, in Ex parte Bowman in 1807, Chief Justice Marshall decided for the universal application of habeas corpus in all court levels. Further refinements have been spurred on by the likes of President Lincoln, who unlawfully suspended the writ during the Civil War, which led to the Supreme Court ruling against him in Ex parte Merryman, affirming that only Congress has the power to suspend habeas corpus.
With the dawn of the 20th century, habeas corpus's role in the context of a federal system took prominence in constitutional law. In the 1960s, the Warren Court allowed that those accused in a state court to appeal for habeas corpus in federal courts. This resulted in the federal courts accounting for convicts that were held unjustly, ultimately strengthening habeas corpus. However, the Burger Court brought limitations on appellations for habeas corpus on a federal level. Habeas corpus further evolved with executive measures such as President Clinton's AEDPA, which upheld state courts in their rulings, leading to a separation within state and federal courts, such as only granting relief if an issue is brought up on the state level.
Habeas corpus has not and shall never be an unreasonable burden on the government. The process of habeas corpus can be a lengthy, sometimes arduous process, exemplified in the vast number of appeals and adding to the backlog of court cases. In 2005, 1.5% of all cases were appealed, signifying 19,000 appeals in total for the court to rehear. But suspension of habeas corpus only leads to the arbitrary nature of government rule. For example, the US military apprehended 120,000 Japanese Americans in the Second World War and restricted the core rights of loyal, productive American citizens without any due process. Thus, in the darkest hour of American history, the suspension of habeas corpus has been abused, proving that in no circumstance, no matter the danger posed to the society, should America's most vital law be nullified, be it the war on terror or a backlog of cases. Thank you, and we are ready for your questions.
Great, thank you so much. And my colleagues will have some follow-up questions, and I'll begin. When James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was president during the War of 1812, New Englanders threatened secession. The British even burned the White House. Still, he never suspended habeas corpus or abridged domestic civil liberties. Why do you think President Madison showed so much constitutional restraint during wartime?
I think at the time, after 1812, the Americans were reeling off of the British colonial era, which was only a couple decades before. And recognizing the tyrannical nature of the British executive branch, that being the king, they recognized that even in those dire times, that suspending habeas corpus might not have been a viable option.
What are some of the other parts of the Constitution intended to protect people against arbitrary incarceration?
Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution as a whole places multiple limits on the Congress, which places great limits, which helps the people by placing limits on the government.
In addition, certain amendments that we have, such as the 9th Amendment, which holds that even liberties we have that are not explicitly stated in the Constitution, we do have those rights. So somebody can, and especially in Amendment 1, we see the right to protest peacefully. This was something that was quite a radical change from the Great British Society. And it was necessary, they thought, for a popular sovereignty.
I'd argue that impeachment is one of the most important factors that limit an arbitrary government against individual citizens. For example, if an executive branch is going way out of their power and inflicting very bad things to the populace, Congress does have the power to ensure that they get impeached so they do not continue such unjust acts.
That's actually a good segue into my question, because you mentioned in your opening statement that this power or habeas corpus has been abused, particularly in wartime. And so I'm wondering if habeas corpus is abused under the umbrella of national security, what recourse do people have against the government?
We saw during World War II, there were a couple cases such as Kiribayashi v. United States and Korematsu v. US that both ruled that in Korematsu the internment was constitutional and that a curfew in Kiribayashi was constitutional. However, a couple months later in Ex parte Endo, we see that one woman, Mitsuye Endo, actually went before the Supreme Court to argue that this was unconstitutional. And so we can see this is one way that US citizens are able to sort of protest unjust imprisonment by going to the courts and appealing to the court system. And it was actually ruled in Ex parte Endo that if somebody is being held unjustly, such as in the Japanese internment, but that they prove through a loyalty test that asks them if they would join the US military, that they were being held unjustly and they could be released.
The revolutionary and founding generations were raised as British subjects and educated under English law. Can you talk about some of the ways that the British law shaped the framers' understanding of constitutionalism?
The British government before the colonial era always had a strong emphasis on precedent, also known as stare decisis. And with such strong precedent and the keeping of past laws, forming a very wide definition of rule of law, the British government carried over such emphasis on previous decisions and previous documents, which we see in today's government.
Going off of my colleague, the British had an unwritten constitution, and our founders created a written constitution for the documents to be there and for our rights to be written down.
Which was more of a direct implementation, something that didn't just have to be recorded by memory.
And instead of having multiple documents, just having the one document to go to.
That brings me to nicely into one of my questions. This unwritten constitution is made up of a series of very, very famous documents. You mentioned one of them at the outset when you mentioned Magna Carta. There is a concept that underlies not just Magna Carta, but every constitution written throughout the world. And in the 20th century, many of these constitutions actually mention this concept either in their preamble or within the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of the Constitution. What is it that is at the foundation, the very heart of Magna Carta that continues into the 21st century and all these constitutions from around the world?
I'd argue that the topic that you mentioned could include the law of nations. The Constitution mentions the law of nations with regards to disputes outside of US territorial borders. And even in the modern era, the United States does refer to the laws of nations in specific times. Most notably in Hamdan v. Rumsfeld, the Geneva Convention is cited with regards to detainees at Guantanamo Bay.
I would say one of the most important concepts that like constitutions and Magna Carta was to limit the government. The reason that Magna Carta was created was to place limitations on the king. And the reason that we created the Constitution was in part to create limits upon our own government.
Additionally, as we saw with our early state constitutions, that they place an emphasis on representative government.
Okay, thank you.
Darcy, are we going to go or no? No. According to the U.S. Constitution, only Congress has the power to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. That is, the president does not have the independent authority to suspend it. Then why have such prominent presidents like Lincoln and Grant, FDR, George W. Bush, why have they been permitted to suspend the writ?
Well, when Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, Congress ruled in Ex parte Merryman that he did not have the right to suspend it. Only Congress did, because it's in Article 1. But they still went with his ruling of suspending habeas corpus.
However, although Congress is given the power, the executive branch has very good qualities in that it is energetic and it can do things quickly, especially in times of strife like war. So in the Civil War, Congress was suspended, and really the executive branch had the only authoritarian power that could do such a thing. So in times of crisis, the executive branch might be needed in these decisions, although it might be unlawful.
Especially as we did see in Executive Order 9066 with FDR and the Japanese internment. This was in a time of war, and we still see, and there still was a large amount of anti-Asian hate.
May continue.
Oh, I was
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as I say to all teams, I want to thank you and your teacher for all of your hard work. This is very demanding material. This, I think, is a particularly difficult question. I think you handled it nicely. I liked, it was a stylistic thing, but I liked the way you began your introductory remarks talking about a dystopian vision. I think it was very effective to kind of frame your remarks. It was different from what we've seen, but it also, it takes people to a vision of things that I don't think any of us would desire, but helps really set the stage for it. I thought you hit a lot of the key touchstones in terms of the articles, the 1789 Judiciary Act, a lot of the necessary touchstone. I think toward the end of your introductory remarks, I like how not only with the Japanese internment, but there was another instance where you sort of the numbers of the cases, and I thought that was very effective. It was with the dystopian thing and that, and then numbers of it was a nice sort of bookending of the introductory portion. I think you carried a lot of those basic background knowledge and historical touchstones forward during the Q&A. And so I think you should be very happy with your performance. It was a very solid performance, and thank you for all your hard work.
Yes, I was real impressed with the beginning of the dystopian society, segueing into Magna Carta and the use of the quotation. One of the things I have to really compliment you about is the idea that habeas corpus is the constitutional jewel of American society. I don't know whether that's original or not, but I'll give you credit for it when I use it in my class the next time. I also thought that you did a really good job with FDR and the 9066 executive order that imprisoned so many Japanese Americans. My final comment is that, and I don't normally do this, but the fact that you began with Dystopian Society, I would like to recommend a book that you might want to read. It's called We, W-E, by Evgeny Zamyatin. And it is about a dystopian society where habeas corpus and many of the other rights that citizens have gone out the window. It's a short read. It's an exciting read. It is the basis of all dystopian society novels written after 1921. So
Well,
enjoy it. And
Thank
you.
you.
yeah.
Enjoy your dystopia. Yeah, no, I thought the dystopian framing of this was really fantastic. And it's true. You know, I mean, governments used to put people in dungeons and they would never be seen again. And I think that that is a really good way to introduce this topic. So kudos to you guys on that, on the, you know, the creativity of that. This was a really interesting discussion. I thought you brought up a lot of good points in your introductory statement, and then in your follow-up, you answered all of our questions very well. You talked to, you know, on my question on the abuse and what recourse citizens have against the abuse. You did a phenomenal job on that. You brought up common law precedent. You talked about how there were multiple documents in the British Constitution. So this was a very nice way to end our day. You guys did an excellent job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank you. Be safe.
Big
Yeah,
round of
you too.
applause. You guys were awesome.
Judges, thank you
Thank
so much. Have a
you.
great day.
Bye.